Afternoon, everyone. Thank you for granting me the grace of a few minutes while I finished up a conversation with our city manager. And today we're here for a series of study sessions. Mr. City Clerk, would you like to start?
I believe we are going to start with Mr. Gary Schaefer.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor, members of the City Council. I'm Gary Schaefer, Director of Library Services, and I am trying to get my paperwork organized here. My apologies. So there we go. Libraries are typically overseen by a governing board, and they often have a foundation in place to facilitate financial giving. Thus, we're here today to discuss the establishment of a board of trustees, a library advisory committee, along with a 501c3 foundation for the library. However, in the case of the foundation, council may choose or wish to expand its scope. But first, for the audience's sake, let's review how we got here. So in June, so I'm well aware council is very familiar with all of this. In June 2023, the City Council directed staff to withdraw from the county library system and establish a task force. Last October, City Council adopted a resolution to withdraw. In November, the County Board of Supervisors received this resolution. In February of this year, City Council finalized with the withdrawal agreement, entered into a lease agreement with College of the Desert for the library, and established a library ordinance. And in March, the County Board of Supervisors ratified and agreed to the terms of withdrawal. Staff have researched best practices related to the governance of municipal libraries and recommend that the City Council serve as the governing board of the library and establish a library advisory committee. Under this scenario, the City Council would be charged with fiduciary and administrative oversight and establishing policy and long-term plans for the library, while the Library Advisory Committee would provide input on programming and space planning, monitor library performance indicators, activities, and outcomes, and connect staff to community groups, while the library director would supervise staff, manage the library collection, implement programming, supervise day-to-day operations, apply policies, and oversee procedures. Staff recommend that council establish a 5-member library advisory committee similar to the Planning Commission and the Finance Committee, and that they be appointed to 4-year staggered terms. We also request that council also appoint 2 alternate members to 4-year terms. Once the more formally structured library advisory committee is established, staff recommend that the temporary library task force, which was put in place to aid in the transition, be disbanded as of June 30th, 2024. I'm happy to take any questions before we move on to the second portion of this presentation.
I want to ask about and thank you, about the bullet point, connect staff to community groups. We've clearly had broad participation in the task force.
Yes.
And while it has been operating, I've heard from a plethora of Palm Desert residents who have really deep, rich professional experience relevant to libraries. So I'm wondering what your vision is for community groups that would provide vehicles for all these residents / users to contribute their experience through the advisory board.
Thank you, Councilmember Kelly, and Madam Mayor. In my experience, it just having a library board such as that, or task force or commission, whatever they are called, I've always found them just invaluable in really opening doors in the community and connecting us to the correct people. So I just, to me, it's not just groups, it can be just members of the community. That's something you have done yourself, is connected us with various groups. So I just think it's would be very advantageous, and we would like to encourage them to help us connect with members of the community. My staff and I are all we're all new to the desert as far as serving in libraries. So it just would be invaluable for them to help us, as you all have, and others to connect, just help us get very cemented into the community. So those were my thoughts.
Do you have any views about whether it could be helpful to supplement or support the work of the advisory committee board with perhaps a user committee that shares ideas or experience about perhaps even mundane issues? You know, where the sanitizer is placed and those kinds of things.
That's a great suggestion. So in my past, we've had experience, and I think the library currently has a teen advisory committee. And so I definitely think, you know, often websites are user tested, but why not libraries? So I think that could be very valuable to establish that. I mean, we try to solicit input and feedback through a myriad of different ways for people to connect with us. But I think that that could be an excellent suggestion that we could look into.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on. So the City Council is also requested to consider establishing a 501c3 charitable organization to facilitate financial contributions by members of the public, grant-making organizations, along with family and community and corporate foundations who wish to financially support the library. It should be noted that often such entities will only give to government entities through a related foundation. So to facilitate this, council could direct staff to establish a foundation. This could also be later expanded to facilitate other giving to support other city-owned community assets should a need arise. Should the council wish to do it, take this route, we would suggest a more generic name for the foundation rather than Palm Desert. I think I have here, and I keep pushing the wrong button. Thank you for your indulgence. So we could go with a specific to the library name, the Palm Desert Library Trust, and just seek donations for the library. But another option that's been put forth is a more generic foundation, such as the Palm Desert Public Trust. And then there would be perchance a library, under that umbrella organization. So that could be for a capital campaign for the library, or it could be just directed for the library. This would allow this to be expanded later to perhaps we would like to have fundraising for the aquatic center, or fundraising for the establishment of a fire station or anything like that. We could do it under the umbrella of one organization. That wouldn't have to be all written up now, but we would want to create the foundation so that it could be expanded at a later date. Council could also forego the formation of a foundation. Just would ask that you keep in mind that some folks will not give to a governmental entity, but governmental entities are eligible to receive donations, and those are typically tax deductible. So that, I believe, concludes the presentation. At this point, happy to again open up for questions or comments from you all on how you best see fit for us to proceed.
I would just comment on one of your last comments. I think people would not be so willing to donate to the city of Palm Desert. They're already going to be thinking it's almost like a tax. And So in my opinion, I believe we should have a different name and set up a 501c3.
Basically the same, what Councilmember Nastandi said. I definitely believe we need a foundation when funds are earmarked and somebody has them, the comfort of knowing it's going to where they intend it going. It just, we want to create that comfort level and the understanding that they are helping certain entities within the city and they have that option of designating. So I love the idea of the 501c3 and I like the idea of the generic foundation, but then you can put separate line items that indicate where they'll be donating. Thank you.
Yeah, I want to echo Jan's comments. I like the idea of the generic form of the foundation, what with new parks coming on board, fire stations, as Gary mentioned. That gives people options and opens up a whole different revenue stream possibly for the city, for people who are feeling generous. And I do like the idea of an advisory committee separate from Parks and Rec. I know some of the folks on Parks and Rec want to focus on parks versus the library and having, I think each component warrants its own sort of separate attention with the new parks, like I said, being built in the city. That'll, draw enough attention from that committee. And I think the library, being a municipal run library, will warrant having a separate committee for that. So that is my opinion. Thank you.
I think that there seems to be a similar set of ideas in regards to how to, one, maintain public trust, two, allow people to feel comfortable in donating while receiving the tax write-off benefit of a 501c3. And for me, it would be crucial that once we, or even part of setting up that organization, when we set up the advisory board, before we start including people, we need to have agreed upon set subcommittees of what those funds will be, because that may drive who is interested in joining and taking on the responsibility of the fiduciary oversight. I like the idea of starting with something generic, but I would see the hesitation of where is my money going once I put it in this bank account. Thank you.
And so many options for people to get their names on buildings.
Well, and interestingly, in my experience, I've been fortunate in different libraries where I've worked that someone has named us in their will. We didn't necessarily know them. We didn't have a relationship with them. And suddenly they gave a gift. And I think, as you have all indicated, they're more likely to do that to a 501c3 foundation than they are to a city entity. So to wrap up, in terms of establishing a board of trustees and a library advisory committee, we just feel it is most important to set that clear division of labor between each of the entities as well as the city. And when it comes to the donations, it is important that we communicate how one makes a donation to support the library and perchance other entities. So that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Greatly appreciate it. What will be coming next, Mr. Clerk?
Mr. Richard Cononi will be talking about the animal services contract.
Good afternoon, Mayor, City Council, Richard Cononi, Director of Development Services. This afternoon, we'll give an overview of our current contract with Riverside County for Animal Services. We'll also look at some cost comparisons for a 9-year period that we've had this contract, some significant changes, increase in costs, trends that we're starting to identify. We've also did some cost comparisons and staffing levels with other cities within the Valley. There's also a number of staff observations and considerations that we've prepared, as well as a recommendation for this next contract period. And so with that, I'll jump right in. I won't get in. There's a lot of numbers in this presentation, so I won't read every single one of them. But this is our overall current contract over the 3-year period. We have for this fiscal year the budgeted amounts as well as the actuals through Q1 and 2 of this year. And as you can see, we have some significant increases, primarily with the animal control officer. 30% increase from first year actual to budget, as well as the overtime costs. But there was also a large or pretty significant increase in sheltering services from the first year of that contract to last year and what we budgeted for this year. And so what we wanted to then do is really look at rather than just base that on those 3-year periods, see how that compared overall with the prior contract periods. And as you see, there's has been general increases through or slight increases throughout the year, but really through that year 3 of the 2018-2020 period to the first year of 21-23 is where you start to see some significant costs in the contract amount. And really what that amounted to was a change, and it's really becomes prevalent here, is with the field services. And while this includes overtime, in that contract period, the one that we're currently in, there was a study that Riverside County had completed that included some increases both at year 1, year 2, and year 3, as they were going to a full cost recovery rate for staff. So that included their staffing time, vehicles, and all of the associated costs with that, where I think before it may have just been on their hourly rate. And then next we looked at sheltering costs as well as the number of animals. One thing that's significant, if you look at the first 2 contract periods, there was a flat rate per animal that the county charged us for sheltering costs. It was, I believe, $125 per animal. And then there was an additional fee. I'm sorry, $125 total, $115 for the animal, and then an operation and maintenance fee of $10.44 per animal. What happened in 21-23 contract period, they changed to a rate of charging per day instead of a per animal fee. And so as you see that $43,862 amount, it's sort of, as you look at it in that totality of a 9-year period, it's somewhat of an anomaly because it is so low. But we think it possibly were 2 factors that contributed to that. One, it was right after COVID. So there may not have been that many animals that were returned to the shelter or that many strays, but it was also a change in how we were being assessed for that fee. But otherwise it starts to level out. But overall, if you look at the total numbers, we're actually starting to see a decline. But again, I think the 43, that roughly 44,000 numbers kind of skewed it a little bit. But I think overall it's probably will average out. So this just shows a total number of animals sheltered annually from over that 9-year period. One thing I wanted to note with this slide, while dogs and cats are primarily the animals that are sheltered when they are brought in, it includes all animals. So there's birds, rabbits, a number of others, but there's such a small amount. For the purposes of today, we're just focusing on dogs and cats. And so what we really looked at then was drilling that number down, trying to understand what the average number of days an animal has been sheltered. And so if you look at 2021, there were 471 animals, total shelter days of 794. And so they only averaged about two days in the shelter. And then you see the numbers 7, and then we're at 5 for this year. And what we don't have for some of the subsequent years is sort of what happened. We are starting to track those numbers now with the animals. One thing I can report, at least for the first 8 months of this fiscal year, it does appear that the vast majority have been adopted. There have been some euthanasia of these animals, but we think it's relatively low. They differentiate between treatable and untreatable. And so untreatable would be a severely injured animal or has some terminal illness where they just can't treat it. So it is put down. But looking at overall, that from that 145 number, about 3%
or 5 animals that were treatable were euthanized. And this just gives that further breakdown of the number between cats and dogs. And so you see it's typically about a 2-to-1, maybe 3-to-1 ratio between the number of cats versus dogs that are in our shelter. And so next we looked at how we compare with a number of other cities in the valley. And as you see, primarily focusing on obviously Palm Desert. Cathedral City pays for half of an FTE, although their costs are not that much lower than ours. One thing to note, particularly with Palm Desert, Coachella, and La Quinta, we all have one officer dedicated to each respective city. Our staffing costs are all the same. And so the big differential is the sheltering cost or some of the overtime costs. And so we're kind of right there with some of the other municipalities that have one dedicated officer. Even Cathedral City, Indian Wells is on call, as is Rancho Mirage. They do. I believe Rancho has an animal control officer that also assists with code, but they use animal control for after hours and overtime services. And then obviously Indio is much larger. They have three full-time officers. And then we also compared that to the 2 municipalities that operate their own shelters, Palm Springs and Desert Hot Springs. These were the numbers that we were able to get from their budget. What we don't have are those additional monies that would have supplemented those operations, similar to the discussion that Gary just had, donations or other gifts that would have been provided to those shelters or even volunteer hours. The other area that we looked at as part of our contract is our dog license fees. We pay the county $11.35 per license fee. And then anything over that is credited back to the city. This was established in 1998. And at that time, we had set the fee at $8 for a 1-year license for Alter Dog, $15 and $19 for a 3-year license. That fee has been the same since 1998. However, the costs have gone up for that processing fee. So currently for 1-year licenses, we're actually subsidizing the license. Instead of getting the credit, we're actually subsidizing roughly $3.35 for Alter Dogs. And then for seniors, $5.35. What I wasn't able to do is get that full breakdown. There are a number of folks that take advantage of the 3-year license, but there are some 1-year license that we are subsidizing. What we also looked at is how our fees compare to all of the other municipalities with respect to altered, unaltered, and then altered for seniors. As you see, Palm Desert and Rancho Mirage, I think they adopted the same language around the same time, and the fees are exactly the same. Riverside, unincorporated Riverside County has gone up as the other cities, and this is just kind of where we sit in comparison with the other cities in the valley that have a contract with Riverside County. We also have a reimbursement program. This grew out of the city. I think at one point offered mobile clinics twice a year. This was discontinued around 2013, 2014. They were costing the city just under $12,000 annually for the 2 clinics. And my understanding is that they were discontinued due to a low turnout, but also there weren't as many Palm Desert residents that were attending the event. And then there were long lines at times that folks were cut off at a certain time and were upset. Again, I wasn't here at the time, but at least this is from what I understand from discussing with Pedro. And then to step in the shoes of that program, the city set up a reimbursement program of $25 for vaccinations, $50 for spay or neutering, and then a full cost of reimbursement for adoption, excluding medication. And so those fees, again, were established at fiscal year 14, 15 and have remained the same since then.
And so what we really try to look at then is how have we done with respect to these reimbursables, primarily vaccines and spay and neutering. And as you see, 14, 15, we had a pretty good number, but significantly dropped off, particularly with spay and neutering. It kind of jolts all over the place. I will say we probably do need to do, and that's part of a consideration, a lot more marketing of this program if it's something we're going to continue. But there are a number of folks that do, that are aware of it and take advantage. And then we also looked at animal adoptions. This one was a little bit difficult to, just because of some of the old data, we don't have the number of animals. And so this is something we're going to start collecting. But you can see where it's kind of really tapered off over the last 4 years in the amount of money that we've reimbursed for adoptions. And then some of our staff observations and considerations, and we'll start first with the reimbursement program. One thing that has grown out of over the last 9 years is the shelter now microchipping animals as they put strays up for adoption. And one thing that we thought would may be able to assist with reducing the amount of sheltering is offering a reimbursement if someone would have their animal microchipped. In staff's conversations with our animal control officer, when they do find a stray, the first thing they do is scan it to see if it's chipped. If they're local, they will return that animal to the homeowner or property, I should say. And so we're not paying that, they're not automatically taking them to the shelter. So there could be some cost savings there. Another consideration would be reimbursing, increasing the amounts for spay and neutering. The shelter no longer does spay and neutering services for the public. They only do them for animals that they send out for adoption. However, Animal Samaritans, SPCA, which is next door, they do offer spay and neutering. And so that's where those costs are that we came up with. It's about roughly what we wanted to have council consider is $100 for cats, $150 for dogs, which is approximately half of that cost. The only other point of clarification I'll make is the $21 microchipping. That is the fee that the shelter charges. I believe Animal Samaritans, I think their fee is roughly $40 or $41 for microchipping. And so if the shelter was offering it, that we were going with that lower cost as far as a consideration. One of the other considerations would be to improve our outreach and marketing of the program. We will have in this next Bright Side an article about this reimbursement program. And Daniel Mora, one of our code officers, who actually was a former animal control officer, as we discussed, some of their ideas, I thought he had a great idea of including signage or a QR code in our dog parks, and so many people use those. And between dog owners and that, it's a pretty tight knit group, and can help kind of spread it through word of mouth. And so those are things, as well as working with Eric and Thomas and that group and coming up with some additional ideas. Another consideration we had was adding a dog license fee for this coming fiscal year in the fee schedule. Again, we weren't again looking to keep it at being the lowest in the valley, but really just wanting to cover our costs, but really trying to keep that 3-year even lower. And what we looked at was looking at a 3-year license versus a 1-year over a 3-year period. The revenue is the same, but the expense, because we're only having to pay that one-time processing fee, would be substantially lower. And so that was one of the other considerations. With respect to field services, I'm going to have Pedro go over some of his interactions with our current code officer. And while he's coming up, I will also mention we did learn this week that the county we were asking for the new, because our contract expires, for the new contract, of course, with budget coming up. And we did learn this week that they are conducting a fee study. So we're probably expecting an increase. We just don't know what that is at this time. But as soon as we do know, we will distribute that through the city manager.
Good afternoon, Mayor, members of the council. Pedro Rodriguez, Code Compliance Supervisor. On this last slide, the observations and considerations is that our animal control officer is dedicated to the city. He's assigned to Palm Desert. We have a very good working relationship with him. This year, as responsiveness, so far he's responded to 592 calls for service. We've seen an increase in service calls for parks and other areas of the city after hours, where people are letting their dogs loose and, it's creating a hazard for people wanting to enjoy the park. So we're working through that. Also having our code enforcement officers as prior animal control officers, it's easy for me to maybe on one of those weekends or an evening shift or an early morning shift, dispatch them out to the park to handle some of these things where there's cost savings there for paying the county overtime. If we ask the county to come out, it's a 3-hour minimum, their overcharge fee. Also, I am receiving calls from the public on they're being upset because they're being contacted for violating animal control laws. So I'm getting those calls. That means that the animal control officer's out there effectively doing his job. And just compared to the last 2 years, fiscal year 21-22, we had 719 calls for service, and in 22-23, 795 calls for service that were assigned in the city. We're in constant communication with him. Anytime we need him or law enforcement needs him, he's also engaged in assisting our homeless outreach team. So when they make contact with people that refuse to leave because that animal is all they have and they're willing to take the services, they can come in and offer resources or help deal with that situation to make sure that the animal is cared for while this person is trying to go into housing, and then they can reunite the two at a later date. So that is another thing that he's involved with. And then our recommendations, we'd like to recommend that we renew and monitor another 3-year contract with the county with some stipulations where we would like to include, they provide us daily activity logs from the assigned animal control officer to ensure that, we're following the standards of the contract. Include address locations for where strays are picked up so we can have an idea where they're picking up our strays, locations and names of individuals that are doing the surrendering, and then request an earlier date for the county to give us the updated rates in early April, early March, because sometimes they don't produce those documents till June or late May, and that kind of helps us plan for budgeting a little better if we could receive those earlier. So that's the end of our presentation, and we're here to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you so much, Pedro. There's so much great information here, and there's a lot of things that I think it's extremely timely that we have these conversations, just as Mr. Canon mentioned, with our contract coming due. As the liaison, and actually as chair to the Animal Services Committee, a lot of these questions have been in our mind. And Council Member Sanchez from La Quinta and I, we recently had a meeting and asked them, what do these numbers really mean? When you're saying a dog was found versus surrendered, how many times that means I don't want to feel guilted for surrendering my dog. I'm just going to say, look at the stray that I found. And how that's kind of difficult to track, number one. Getting a definition of what is considered an animal that is treatable versus untreatable versus a special needs dog, and them admitting that sometimes they don't wait more than 2 days to euthanize an animal. So when they're saying that there's an average of, 5 days that they're keeping them, that's not what they were telling us. They were kind of dancing around what is considered a sick animal and how much access they have to a virtual veterinarian to make those designations. They claim that they are going to get more information back to us. Also, the same thing about a fee study. I agree, they're probably going to raise the rates, and I appreciate that you want greater accountability to say, we want to know this information. That's part of what our committee has been asking as well. They gave us these great sheets that say we've got this many or that many. When they talk about adoptable kittens, for example, they list in the unadoptable kittens that must be euthanized if they are surrendered before 8 weeks. So I'd like to know how many of those, for example, are kept. And I know this is a lot of detailed information, but with all of the animal lovers that are counting on us to be humane about it, but also those that really are looking at the dollars and cents and less about animal services, right? Where do we have the balance? They have also mentioned, and I would like to know if it's your experience, that if there is, do the animal control services representatives or when they show up to, what's the word I'm looking for? Do they have the ability to euthanize on site?
I believe the animal control officers are certified to do that if the dog meets the requirements. If it's been injured to the point where it's not, it's just the best for interest of the animal, I believe they can do that.
But I know that was something that I wanted to be sure was iterated in public because of the controversial nature of euthanasia. I don't think, again, that in future data, if it would be great for us to get a breakdown of what are the treatable versus untreatable, because it's like they're putting their best foot forward with a nice little chart, but we want to see where the numbers really are. And I think the reason why we've seen such a drastic decline in the number of reimbursements for spay and neuter, they are practically impossible to schedule because they're not available, because we have a shortage of veterinarians. It's believed that for each one veterinarian, there's 165,000 jobs in the country. There are only 2 veterinary schools in California, and then they leave because Arizona offers them tuition reimbursement. That's all factoring into why we can't get them spayed or neutered. There are programs that are available, and I'm not sure if that's on your radar or something that we can potentially collaborate, that they now have a mobile spay and neuter bus, that their estimate is it would cost $3,000 to $5,000 to bring them. I think at the park would be a good idea. That would reduce the amount of undesired and unintended animals that we have in our community. But I think that we have a drastic need to make sure that we have the responsibility to offer spay and neuter, because animal services or the animal campus is just not doing it. And one last consideration, did you say everybody in code control already has a chip scanner?
No, we don't have them. Only the animal control officers. We don't have those
The
items.
animal campus said that they're about $10 and that they would be very happy to provide them. So in the event that they find an animal, if that would help contact the owner instead of having to have an animal to look like they could be on the wait list or something horrible, reuniting a family with, they said usually within a few blocks, they'll find a dog or stray within a few blocks from home, but they said they are willing to help provide that. Their suggestion was that in other cities, they even have them present at City Hall because people won't know where to take them. So I think a $10 investment or grant, I think would be another way to reduce our sheltering costs.
Yes, it definitely would expedite the reuniting the animal with its owner if we were able to do that. And like Richard mentioned in his presentation, in reimbursing, getting the word out, getting people to know that microchipping is important and the reasons why. Maybe we can get the buy-in from the community and get more people to start microchipping, and then we can be equipped with those tools so that we can reunite animals back home instead of having them in the shelter.
And I love the idea of putting things with the QR codes and info at the dog parks. And that's where it'd be great to advertise and say, here's where we'll bring, the clinic, the van. I mean, if it's $3,000 investment and it'll save us a couple $100,000 in sheltering fees, where we can invest. But thank you for all that you take on as a crew, because stressed animals are not easy to deal with, and stressed owners when they're in that. These are emotional support animals for a lot of folks, certified or uncertified. So thank you for what your team takes on.
You're welcome.
Mayor?
If I may, quickly, I absolutely support the idea of the marketing our Palm Desert reimbursement programs better. And I'm always amazed when I talk about it, really, it kind of went away and very few people are aware of it. And certainly the numbers indicate the same. I also support the idea of increasing the license fee. I mean, we need to do that. We can't, I mean, the programs we offer are very generous, but we have to make sure we have the animals licensed that we can have licensed. I'd also like to look at, and this is something I suppose we need to do with the county, is figure out a way to have the animals fixed. And, you know, when you look at the numbers, and certainly cats are known for having multiple litters, and these numbers reflect the same. How can we get some programs out where we're doing more neutering and spaying of cats? That I think is really critical. So if we can look at those and maybe have a meeting with the county about how we can stress the importance of those things, I think that would be important, and maybe put a dent in the issue we're dealing with. So if we market the PD programs, increase the license fee, and then somehow encourage the chips and the fixing, I think we might have the beginning of a solution at any rate. And I know it's a lot of work that we've been doing, but these numbers show that we need to tell people, you know, tell them what we told them, tell them what we're going to tell them, and tell them again about the opportunities they have with the city and taking care of their animals. Thank you.
Just to complete your need for feedback, yes, to all of your recommendations as a starting point.
So I share the sentiments of the mayor and my fellow council members. One point that got brought up, though, is that there is a shortage of veterinarians to perform these neutering and spraying of the animals. So if that is true, that's the crux of the issue. And how do we get more medical professionals to do this? Or can we license assistant veterinarians, or perhaps we need to be looking at that? Okay.
There are registered veterinary programs. Something we discussed in the committee is, do we even need to, find ways to ask our legislators to look into the tuition reimbursement to keep the veterinarians here for those same reasons? We've been figuring out how to do that to incentivize COD to have such a registered vet tech program, or even just a vet tech, but even they are limited in what they can do. But one other question that I had that came from those same meetings, has the city ever had anything that addresses breeding in the city? Having an accidental pregnancy is different than people that are selling their dogs, and where they say the term puppy mill or dog mill is a negative connotation. It is what it is. There is a discussion of potentially people that have permits to do that, and if they would have to be like AKC registered, and that we do have an entity here in the valley that does that. So if you've seen it, or if you have heard of other colleagues that do that, I think that would help reduce the numbers and ensure that we have more spay and neuter and have a fine for repeat offenders.
All right. Thank you, Pedro and Richard, for the report. Appreciate it. Quick question, and maybe I'm missing it, but our contract with Riverside County costs us $372,000 annually, roughly.
Correct.
Okay. I saw individual fees, but I did not see a total revenue amount generated by those fees for the city. Is that a figure we have available? I'm just wondering how much we subsidize our contract with Riverside County. Might give us an idea of, I agree, we probably ought to raise our licensing fees, but in this report, I didn't see that. I'm sorry. I should have caught it over the weekend when I got my agenda. But anyway, I'm just wondering how much is being subsidized.
For the most part, we could drill it down a little more, but the license credit, that's essentially about the only thing we get back from Riverside County. Otherwise, we're
Okay. Got it. So we're covering basically, it looks like 340,000, 330,000 that we're having to pay out of pocket.
Correct.
Got it. Okay. Thanks, guys. Sorry, I missed that.
Okay, thank you very much.
Greatly appreciate you. Thank you.
You.
Do we have another presentation?
No other presentations, Madam Mayor?
It is 3:50. I think it's time that we should go to closed session, but first we do need a roll call.
Let's see. Mayor Pro Tem Harnick,
Here.
Councilmember Kelly,
Here.
Councilmember Nastandi,
Here,
Councilmember Trivy,
Here.
Mayor Quintanilla.
Here.
And for the record, there's no public comment on closed session items
Would-
received.
We recess at 3:51. Thank you.